Hello and welcome to this video on the benefits and costs of globalization. In this video, we're going to look at some of the benefits and costs of globalization to the economy of a country, but also to the businesses within that country. Okay, let's look at some of the benefits to an economy and start off perhaps with consumers. Well, as part of a globalized world, as a consumer, you have increased choice. You can buy electronics, food, clothing from many different countries, and perhaps as a result, you might get better quality. In a globalized world, we can source our products from those countries or businesses that do it the cheapest. From a country's perspective, globalization offers the potential for growth if we have a specialized industry or services that are in high demand, then there should be an increase in exports and GDP. There's an increased international economies of scale, could be a benefit. And there may be greater employment opportunities. If you are a country that is taking advantage of globalization, have high demand for your goods and services, then there should be more jobs being created. Let's look at, particularly from a corporate firm or business's point of view, what would be the advantages of globalization? Well, greater revenue as you sell your products into new markets, possibly lowering of costs as you decide to offshore, outsource, or seek production where it's cheapest, so therefore greater profits. Greater profits may allow you to invest in more innovative designs. Globalization, access to new territories and new countries may open up sources of raw materials that you could take advantage of. Here we're thinking kind of maybe the oil industry, things like to do with the primary sector. Access to labor, cheap and skilled. So the opening up in China has allowed many businesses like Apple, for example, to use their cheap and skilled workforces to help manufacture their products. Maybe controlling or getting access to key supplies. So we're thinking maybe if you would a business that would do a joint venture with a local government in the Middle East, then you might control an oil well, for example. And companies can benefit from global economies of scale. What might be some of the costs of globalization? Well, and globalization tends to, or has been shown to result possibly in more income inequality. So the gap between the rich and the poor getting wider between countries and also within countries. Those large chief executives who operate multinational companies might be earning huge amounts, whilst the poor, low-skilled worker who's lost their job to someone in another country who can do their job for cheaper might become poorer. Some would argue that globalization has allowed large, rich Northern Hemisphere countries and their companies to dominate global trade and to use resources of other countries and dominate their markets as well. So the flip side of that, there may be a lack of opportunities for the poorer countries to be able to have access to markets. When you consider how many products are available in this country from developing countries and compare it to how many products are available from other developed countries, you might see there's quite a stark contrast with few developing economies, companies succeeding or having access to the UK's markets. A globalized world with lots of trade means that we are very reliant on the performance of other economies. So rather than being self-sufficient, we rely on other economies being customers for our businesses. And if those customers suffer poor economic performance, then that may have an adverse effect on businesses here. Global brands may dominate in different markets, limiting competition. There may be the exploitation of workers and growers. So businesses may threaten to relocate their businesses elsewhere if there are, say, a minimum wage put in place, or if they put in health and safety regulations that raises the costs. Some people complain that everywhere you go these days, you see the same fast food restaurants and the same coffee chains, and actually as a result, individual countries are kind of losing some of their cultural identity. Another criticism of globalization is it leads to a race to the bottom, and this can often be related to things like tax. So large corporations may threaten governments by saying, well, if you don't cut your tax rate, your corporation tax rate, we will move our business somewhere else where there's a lower tax rate. And what ensues is a race to the bottom where governments cut tax rates to try and attract businesses, and then as a result, they don't get enough tax revenue to provide the services that they need to for their country's inhabitants. And lastly, you can see big trade imbalances. So, for example, China exports a huge amount. It's very dependent on the US market for consumers. On the flip side of that is that the US import a huge amount and don't export much. And this can build up big imbalances where one country has a lot of money coming in and one country has a lot of money going out, and creates issues as to how that works and where that money comes from. The last one is unemployment. So many politicians in advanced countries say that one of the reasons that we have unemployment in the UK or in the EU is because a lot of jobs have become globalized and gone to other countries where it's cheaper to do, or there maybe are less stringent regulations. Okay, let's have a look at some of the potential disadvantages of globalization to corporations, firms, businesses. Well, are they causing damage to the environment through their activities or through transporting goods along their supply chains? Are they exploiting, or are their workforce being exploited in their name? So often large corporations hire businesses in emerging markets to do their production for them. But if those businesses are not treating their workers very well and exploiting their workers, that can often come back to the multinational that is responsible for the contract. And so there can be negative PR, public relations issues. Some markets, as a result of globalization, there can be a monopoly position occur when one company dominates, which limits competition. Using up economic resources unsustainably, so running down the kind of economy or the resources available to that economy could be a disadvantage. Okay, some other issues to consider with globalization. If you have globalized businesses, so multinationals like the ones we've mentioned already, who are they accountable to? So who are they responsible to? Who ensures that they're behaving in a kind of a proper manner? Some people have argued that globalization and income inequality and the constant pressure or movement of or homogenization, making everything kind of more like the same, has fueled potential terrorist reactions. Do businesses have an ethical responsibility? For example, the race to the bottom, should they be seeking the lowest tax rate around the world that maximizes their profits, or should they actually be paying a fair amount of tax as considered by that country to help provide public services within that country? Should they be responsible for producing things in an environmental manner? Should they be responsible for treating their workers in a certain way, and where we draw the line? The last one is that globalization, big migration flows, large levels of unemployment, big trade imbalances have led to some instances where people have protested, and there have been examples of political unrest as a result of a kind of anti-globalization message. That's it. That's the benefits and costs of globalization. Thanks very much.